Hello and welcome to The Resourceful Woman. Today I am going to be talking you through one of my more recent inventions. This is how to do a pumpkin spice latte from scratch at home. Even though I don't even have an espresso maker and I live in a country where I cannot really get canned pumpkin mix. So I've had to figure out through some advice from the internet and some trial and error how to make my own pumpkin spice blend, and then how to make a reasonable and I think actually quite good approximation of a pumpkin spice latte, just like you might get at any coffee shop in the US anytime in the autumn. So I will give you a little bit of background. Because I am American but I live overseas in the United Kingdom, as soon as kind of late August hits, all of my social media feed is full of people talking about pumpkin spice lattes, and there are a fair few coffee shops over here now that serve them, but because we're in lockdown, I was kind of interested in finding things that I could just make for myself and have at home, and especially because it's a lot cheaper to do this kind of stuff at home than to pay like, £5 for a single coffee at a coffee shop. So I had to look around a little bit for pumpkins. I had to wait really for Halloween to come along to find some pumpkins in the shop, and I got like the last few that there were, and you'll see one of them is not in great shape and I may have to cut out most of it because it's already started to go a bit bad, but this is actually a fairly simple and straightforward recipe, as you'll see. It just takes some time and dedication to get the pumpkin spice mix together in the first place, and then once you have it, you can store it in the fridge and reach for it anytime you want to make a coffee. So my partner and I have been drinking these for the last couple of weeks. I've just run out of my last batch, so it's time to make some more. Let's get started. First things first, remove the outer skin and inner seeds and cut your pumpkin into chunks. There are probably multiple ways of doing this. I just take a very sharp knife and remove the outer skin in long strips. Place the large chunks of flesh into a blender or food processor and puree as finely as you can. One time I did this, I added a little oat milk to the veg in the food processor, thinking it would help to liquefy the contents a bit more, but it really didn't seem to make a difference. I wouldn't recommend doing that with dairy milk, as that stuff tends to go off much more easily and could rot your whole batch as a result. How long you should blend depends on the machine you're using. I used about 3 cycles or 3 minutes and 45 seconds on puree in the Ninja. At the end of each cycle, I nudge down any chunks that aren't blending properly and then keep going. The idea is just to get it as close to liquid as possible. I would normally make this with just one pumpkin, and the recipe details that follow are based on one pumpkin, but knowing as I did that I might not get any more pumpkins this season, I decided to make a double batch this time. I had seen that the second pumpkin was going off really quickly, and I had considered just throwing it out, but I noticed once I cut it open that more than half of the flesh was still perfectly usable. So I just cut out the soft bits and kept the rest. I try as much as possible not to waste food and to only throw the bare minimum into compost. Once you have all of your pumpkin flesh suitably pureed into a near liquid, it's time to cook it down. Some recipes I found just had you adding spices to the puree and making a coffee with that. I have found that by mixing the spices in at this point and then cooking it down to about half or a third of its original volume, you get a much richer, more pumpkin-y flavor, and as an added bonus, it makes your house smell amazing for days. You can see me adding a bit extra here because I'm cooking with a bit of extra pumpkin, but the standard recipe I use for spices per pumpkin is 2 tablespoons of ground cinnamon, 2 teaspoons ground ginger, 1 teaspoon ground nutmeg, and a pinch to a 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves. If you do not have all of these things, you can use 1 tablespoon of allspice plus 1½ tablespoons of ground cinnamon. Mix this all together over a high heat and get it really steaming and bubbling, then turn it down and simmer for 20 to 30 minutes, or until a lot of the water has evaporated and it's about a third to a half of its original volume. When it is done and has cooled, store it in a sealable container. If you make big batches, you can seal the jars as I showed in my video about preserving and canning. Now to make your drink. Mix up some black coffee in whatever is your normal way. When I first looked up recipes, they all called for quote-unquote strong coffee, but I don't have an espresso machine, and I'm not really sure how to make my coffee much stronger than I already do. So I found a way around that. In a small pan, heat a half a mug of your preferred type of milk with 1 to 2 sugars, 2 heaping spoonfuls of your pumpkin spice mix, and a spoonful of coffee essence. This is how I get around the strong coffee. I found this in my local grocery and it is fantastic for adding a bit of extra coffee flavor in lieu of espresso. Once it's heating, whisk it a bit and heat it until it's almost bubbling, but don't let it boil or skin may form. Right, so the very last thing about how to make this is that you're probably going to want to strain a little bit of the pumpkin out of the actual drink. The first time I tried making these, it was a little bit chewy, so yeah, I just use a little tea strainer, put it over the mug that I'm using, and just pour it in little bit by little bit. This doesn't take very long. Yes, it is an extra step and it's a little bit annoying, but it's no big deal. And I just move around some of that pumpkin puree until all the liquid gets through. This is the next morning, by the way. I wasn't really in the mood for coffee when I finished making the puree yesterday. See, so rather than have that wind up in your cup, it can just wind up on the side there. When you've strained about half a mug of milk mixture, top it up with your black coffee, and et voila! A delicious and crazy cheap version of a PSL, which you can make at home for pennies without having to put on trousers or go anywhere. So there you have it, a perfect homemade pumpkin spice latte, which is great if you live outside the US. It's harder to get pumpkin spice anything, it's hard to get pumpkin puree, or you're in lockdown and all of the cafes are closed. This is as I hope you see, pretty easy, pretty straightforward, and really, really delicious. So I hope that you try this at home, and leave me a comment if you do try it and tell me what you think. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.